My grandmother used to grab my hair so violently it snapped my head back and made my neck crack. And after years of enduring it, I ended up forcing her to face the very thing she weaponized against me. Her name was Marina, she was 72, and she had been fixated on my hair for as long as I could remember. I wore it long and curly, falling past my waist, and she treated it like public property. Every visit meant her hand yanking from behind, jerking my spine, then fingers raking through the curls as she claimed she was checking if it was real. She started this when I was 5. I was 23 now. The pain never dulled. My scalp would throb for hours afterward, and I learned to brace myself whenever I heard her footsteps behind me. At family dinners, Marina would hover, breathing down my neck, grabbing fistfuls of my hair to smell it while I sat frozen in my chair. She said she was making sure I wasn't using cheap products that reflected badly on the family. If she didn't like the scent, she pulled harder and announced to the table that my hygiene was questionable. When I tried to lean away, her grip tightened and she reminded everyone that disrespectful grandchildren didn't deserve personal space. Sometimes she wrapped my hair around her hand like a rope, tugging me closer so she could critique my weight, my job, or the fact that I wasn't married yet. Each judgment landed with a sharp yank, like punctuation made of pain. She never cared about timing or witnesses. At my cousin Hannah's wedding, she grabbed my hair mid-ceremony because she wanted to know if my curls were natural or I gasped so loudly the sound echoed through the church. Marina leaned close and whispered, loudly enough for rows of guests to hear, that only trashy women got perms, and she needed to be sure. She pulled strands loose and inspected them while vows were being exchanged. When my mother Lena told her to stop, Marina snapped that she had a right to know if her granddaughter was lying about her appearance. The humiliation burned worse than the pain. Marina constantly compared my hair to hers. She kept hers dyed blonde, thin and fragile, spending hundreds every month at the salon. She would clutch both our heads, declaring mine too thick, too ethnic, too She told people I grew it long just to show off and make other women feel inferior. During photos she yanked it aside, saying I took up too much space in the frame. One Christmas, as I served myself potatoes, she grabbed my hair and wrenched me backward so hard I dropped the spoon. Hot food splattered across the floor. She laughed and said, "Clumsy girls shouldn't have distracting hair," then held my hair like reins, steering me around the kitchen to demonstrate how girls were trained to be graceful in her day. My boyfriend Evan finally spoke up, and Marina sneered that he was weak for defending someone with obviously fake hair. Yanking so hard, my neck cracked audibly. What Marina didn't know was that her prized hair wasn't natural at all. I learned that from her stylist, Mateo, when I visited the same salon. Casually, he mentioned she'd been wearing extensions for years because her hair was so thin. Only a small portion was real. The rest was thousands of dollars worth of European extensions replaced every couple of months. She told everyone her hair was naturally thick for her age and proof of good genetics. That lie mattered when she hosted her 73rd birthday garden party and demanded everyone attend. She called me personally to order me to wear my hair up so I wouldn't steal attention from her event, promising consequences if I disobeyed. I showed up with my hair down. She spotted me instantly and charged across the lawn, her hand already outstretched. She grabbed a massive handful from the back of my head and yanked downward, snarling that I'd never learned respect. I stepped sideways on instinct. Extensions aren't meant for sudden force. And when she lost her balance and grabbed harder, the motion ripped several tracks free. She fell face first into the dessert table, but the real spectacle was her hair. Blonde extensions tore loose, dangling from her hand and tangled in my curls. Bald, shiny patches were exposed on her scalp. More pieces slipped free as she scrambled, landing on the grass like lifeless snakes. Her real hair was short, gray, and patchy, sticking out at odd angles under the remaining crooked extensions. The party froze. Marina stood there smeared with cake, clutching torn extensions, her illusion destroyed in front of everyone. She tried to cover the gaps with her hands, but there wasn't enough hair to hide them. One extension hung crookedly over her ear. Another slid down the back of her head and dropped when she grabbed at it. I could feel my heart in my throat as she turned on me, rage blazing in her eyes. She was about to scream when she noticed a blonde track still tangled in my hair, linking us like evidence. Someone let out a small, involuntary laugh, and the tension shattered. Guests looked away, bit their lips, or stared in horrified fascination. Evan stepped between us, calmly stating that everyone saw she fell because she refused to let go of my hair. Marina accused me of planning the humiliation, her voice cracking as she shook. While my mother Lena finally spoke up, trembling but firm, telling her to stop. Marina's control had slipped, and for the first time in my life, the entire family saw it. No one moved for several seconds after Evan spoke. Marina's face cycled through fury, shock, and something close to panic as she realized there was nowhere left to hide. My mother Lena stepped forward, her hands shaking at her sides, and told Marina to stop making a scene. The words sounded almost absurd given the disaster unfolding around us. But the tremor in Lena's voice carried years of fear and restraint cracking open. Marina spun toward her so fast another extension slipped loose and landed at her feet. She demanded to know whose side her daughter was on, the question hissing through clenched teeth. Lena didn't answer. She just stared at her mother with a look I had never seen before, something firm and unyielding. My uncle Raymond moved in, carefully, palms out, speaking like he was calming a frightened animal. He suggested Marina sit down and that everyone should probably leave. Before anyone could act on that suggestion, a woman near the punch bowl spoke up. Her name was Celeste Parker, a longtime family friend who had known Marina for decades. She said she wasn't leaving until someone explained what she'd just witnessed. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd as people looked from the extensions on the grass to the exposed patches on Marina's scalp and finally to the strand still caught in my hair. Something irreversible had happened, and everyone knew it. Marina suddenly dissolved into tears. Real ones, streaming down her frosting-smeared face as her shoulders shook. She claimed she had a medical condition that caused hair loss and accused me of deliberately making her fall to expose her in front of everyone. Her performance was convincing enough that a few guests who didn't know her well looked at me with uncertainty. Before doubt could settle, my cousin Betrayal stepped forward from the back of the crowd. She said she'd heard Marina yank my hair during her wedding ceremony, loud enough that the entire church reacted. She reminded everyone Marina had been pulling my hair since I was a child, and told her to stop pretending to be the victim. Marina's mouth opened and closed without sound. The photographer shifted awkwardly and asked if he should delete the photos he'd just taken. Marina screamed yes, but several guests spoke up at once, saying they already had videos on their phones. One woman admitted she was still recording. Another said he'd already sent footage to the family group chat. The realization that her humiliation was documented and spreading snapped Marina's last thread of control. She began shouting about lawsuits and invasion of privacy, pointing at people with a shaking finger as more extensions slipped free. Evan touched my elbow and quietly suggested we leave before it got worse. Walking away felt unreal. My legs trembled as we reached the car, and my phone started buzzing before I even closed the door. Messages poured in from relatives still at the party. Betrayal wrote that after we left, several women admitted Marina had been physically aggressive with them too, always framed as affection or grooming. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying the sound of Marina hitting the table and the sight of blonde extensions falling like discarded skins. Part of me felt relief after 18 years of pain, but guilt pressed heavy to keep. I had humiliated an old woman in public, even if I hadn't planned it. Evan wrapped an arm around me and reminded me I'd only stepped aside. But the image of Marina's exposed scalp wouldn't leave my mind. Morning brought more chaos. I woke to dozens of messages and missed calls. Raymond sent a long text accusing me of cruelty and demanding I apologize immediately, insisting his mother was devastated. Then Lena called. Her voice broke as she apologized for watching Marina hurt me for years without stopping it. Hearing my mother say she was sorry after all that time left my hands shaking. I told her I needed space and hung up, overwhelmed. Evan made tea and sat with me while I tried to breathe through it all. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Betrayal stood there with her sister Naomi, whom I barely knew. They sat at my kitchen table and started talking without preamble. Naomi described Marina grabbing her hair during a family photo session when she was 12, pulling so hard she had a bald spot for weeks. Betrayal shared stories of Marina pinching her arms during dinners, smiling while leaving bruises and calling her sensitive if she protested. They talked for over an hour, each story confirming a pattern of cruelty disguised as care. They admitted they'd each thought they were alone. Hearing them brought both relief and sorrow. Marina had isolated us all. 3 days later, an unfamiliar number called. A man introduced himself as Thomas Reed, Marina's brother. I'd met him only a couple of times in my life. He said Raymond told him what happened and wanted me to know Marina had been like this since childhood. He described her pulling his hair and hiding him where bruises wouldn't show, and how their mother dismissed it as spirited behavior. He'd joined the military at 18 just to escape her, and had kept his distance for decades. He told me standing up to Marina was brave, something he'd never managed. His words validated what I'd lived with and left me grieving how long everyone had endured her in silence. That evening there was pounding on our apartment door. It was Raymond. He pushed inside, red-faced and shaking, yelling that I'd destroyed his mother's reputation. Evan tried to stop him, but Raymond barreled on, accusing me of lying and turning the family against her. Something inside me snapped. I told him Marina had been assaulting me since I was 5, described the pain, the cracked neck, the public humiliations. I asked where he'd been all those years. My voice rose until I was shouting. Raymond went pale and sank onto the couch, stunned. He admitted he'd thought it was just her being affectionate. By the end, his eyes were wet, and he apologized for not seeing it sooner. 2 days later, Marina called me at work. Remembering Evan's advice, I recorded the call. Her voice was cold and calculated as she accused me of attacking her unprovoked and warned she was considering legal action. She spoke for nearly 10 minutes, threatening to ruin my reputation. When she finished, I told her the call was recorded. Silence followed, then she hung up. That night, Lena called in tears, saying Marina was spreading lies to relatives. I sent the video from the party to the family chat. By morning, apologies flooded in as people saw the truth. Stories began pouring out. Cousins shared experiences of slaps, pinches, and insults. The video opened a floodgate. Raymond later met me for coffee, bringing old home videos that showed Marina yanking my hair at birthday parties while everyone laughed. Watching myself flinch on screen made my stomach churn. Raymond finally understood what he'd ignored for years, and seeing his remorse was both painful and necessary. I went back to work after meeting Raymond, but my body was there while my mind lagged behind. Coworkers asked if I was okay, and I kept answering yes out of habit even though my chest felt tight all day. A week passed in slow motion, filled with more texts and whispered phone calls as family members continued arguing, apologizing, or quietly reevaluating everything they thought they knew. Just when it felt like the storm might finally ease, it escalated again. On a Tuesday morning, Marina showed up at my office without warning, turning my workplace into another stage for her need for control. I was at my desk when a coworker told me someone was demanding to see me at reception. Marina stood there in an expensive wig that looked stiff and unnatural, nothing like her old extensions. The moment she saw me, she started shouting about betrayal and loyalty, her voice echoing through the office. She accused me of ruining her life and said ungrateful children didn't deserve careers. When my manager stepped out and asked her to leave, Marina demanded I be fired for being a liar and abuser. Security had to escort her out while she screamed threats from the sidewalk. I stood frozen, humiliated and shaking. Instead of reprimanding me, my manager closed her office door and asked if I felt safe. She told me about her own abusive grandmother and said behavior like Marina's often escalated when control was lost. She suggested documenting everything and offered the rest of the day off. I cried in my car afterward, stunned by kindness where I expected judgment. That evening, my mother arrived with a box of old photo albums. We sat on the couch, flipping through pages filled with evidence we'd all ignored for years. In photo after photo, Marina's hand was in my hair or gripping my arm while I tried to smile. Lena admitted she'd normalized the behavior because Marina had treated her the same way growing up. She thought it was love because that's what she'd been taught. Seeing it laid out in photographs broke something open in both of us. We cried together over images of pain disguised as family moments. When Evan came home, he found us surrounded by albums and quietly joined us. Later that night, he suggested cutting off contact with anyone still defending Marina. We argued, both exhausted and scared, and it ended with tears and an uncomfortable night apart. The next morning we apologized and agreed healing couldn't be rushed. A few days later, the family chat erupted again. Marina accused me of stealing money from her purse during the party. An outright lie meant to shift the narrative from abuse to crime. Some relatives questioned it until others pointed out I'd left immediately, and that cameras would show I never went near her belongings. The accusation collapsed quickly, but the damage lingered. Then Thomas flew in from out of state and asked to meet with several of us. Sitting in Raymond's living room, he described decades of Marina's cruelty, how she'd manipulated and divided relatives to maintain control. Hearing it confirmed what we were finally piecing together. 3 weeks after the party, a legal letter arrived threatening to sue me for emotional distress. Evan's family connected us with a lawyer who reviewed it and said it was intimidation without substance. He drafted a response outlining Marina's 18 years of abuse with witness statements and stills from the video. Reading it made me cry. Not from fear but relief. For the first time, the truth was written clearly and professionally. After the letter was sent, the threats stopped. Raymond later told me Marina backed down after her lawyer advised her she had no case, then pivoted to claiming stress-related health scares. Marina's attempts to regain control cost her relationship with Raymond. When he suggested therapy after a hospital visit revealed nothing physically wrong, she fired him as her power of attorney and cut him off. He called me afterward, devastated, grieving a mother who was still alive but unreachable. We talked for hours about loving someone who causes harm and how accepting reality can feel like another loss. Around that time, Lena organized a family meeting without Marina. 15 relatives showed up, many sharing stories of pinches, slaps, and manipulation they'd never voiced before. The realization that Marina had pitted us against each other for decades was both horrifying and freeing. We created a separate family support group chat, promising honesty and mutual protection. That space became a lifeline. When Marina discovered it and posted publicly about being abandoned, several relatives finally responded with their truths. The narrative she'd controlled for years fractured under shared experiences. Not everyone supported us, but enough did to break her hold. Weeks later, Marina called Lena and offered a half acknowledgement, blaming generational differences. Lena stood firm, telling her excuses weren't accountability. Watching my mother hold that line was painful and empowering all at once. I started therapy soon after, learning that relief and grief could coexist. Dr. Harris helped me understand I was mourning not just the abuse, but the grandmother I'd hoped Marina could be. Healing didn't mean rewriting the past or pretending it didn't hurt. It meant accepting complexity without self-blame. 2 months later, Evan proposed in the botanical gardens where we'd first met. He said watching me set boundaries showed him my strength. I said yes through tears, feeling like something new was finally growing from the wreckage. The engagement stirred more reactions. But by then, I was steadier. Marina's behavior softened cautiously, constrained by clear boundaries and consequences. It wasn't warmth, but it was restraint. For the first time, I felt my life wasn't orbiting her moods. The chaos she created had forced the truth into the open. And while it cost relationships and illusions, it also gave me something I'd never had before. I had my voice, my space, and the knowledge that stepping aside wasn't cruelty. It was survival. The months that followed felt quieter on the surface, but underneath, everything was still shifting. Boundaries had been drawn, yet they were fragile, like newly healed skin that could tear if pressed too hard. Marina didn't disappear from our lives, but she no longer had free access to me. And that change alone altered the entire family dynamic. I noticed it most in the small moments, the pauses before she spoke, the way relatives no longer rushed to smooth things over for her. Silence had replaced fear. And it was unfamiliar to all of us. Thanksgiving arrived for months after the garden party, and Raymond offered to host under strict conditions. He made it clear that any drama would end the gathering immediately. Marina arrived, dressed carefully, wearing a neat pantsuit and a wig that looked deliberately understated. When she saw me, her greeting was stiff and formal, like we were co-workers meeting in a hallway. She didn't touch my hair. She didn't comment on my body or my life. Throughout dinner she stayed at the far end of the table, talking about gardening and weather, and when someone asked her to pass a dish, she did so without commentary. The tension was thick, but nothing exploded. When it was over, several cousins texted me saying it was the first peaceful holiday they could remember. Christmas followed the same uneasy pattern. Marina complied with the rules but complained about having to watch herself, muttering about walking on eggshells. Raymond shut that down quickly, reminding her that basic respect wasn't oppression. She sulked but didn't escalate. For the first time, her moods were no longer the axis around which everything revolved. It wasn't joyful, but it was calm, and that felt like progress. I kept reminding myself that safety mattered more than sentiment. Evan and I set our wedding date for the following June and sent out save-the-dates in January. With Marina's invitation, we included a clear reminder of the boundaries we expected her to respect. It felt strange, formalizing expectations that should have been obvious, but experience had taught us clarity was necessary. A week later, her RSVP arrived, marked yes, along with a check labeled engagement gift. It felt transactional, almost like a peace treaty, but I accepted it anyway. Progress didn't have to look pretty to be real. As wedding planning ramped up, something unexpected happened. I realized my hair no longer felt like a shield or a battleground. For years I'd kept it long, partly out of defiance, as if cutting it would mean she'd won. One afternoon, on impulse, I booked an appointment at a salon across town, far from anywhere Marina frequented. I asked the stylist to cut several inches and give it shape, something lighter. When he spun the chair around, I barely recognized myself. My hair still fell past my shoulders, but it moved freely. I felt lighter, physically and emotionally. I posted a photo online, and supportive comments poured in. Marina said nothing. Her silence felt like victory. 6 months after the party, Raymond called me sounding different, less burdened. He told me Marina had started seeing a therapist at her doctor's insistence after stress affected her health. He wasn't sure how honest she was being, but the fact that she was showing up mattered. I didn't know how to feel about it, but I allowed myself a cautious neutrality. Hope didn't have to be all or nothing anymore. At a cousin's birthday dinner weeks later, Marina stopped behind my chair, and my body tensed automatically. Instead of grabbing me, she said quietly that my hair looked nice. The comment was awkward and brief, but it was the first positive thing she'd ever said about my appearance without cruelty attached. I thanked her, and we both returned to our meals. My heart raced for minutes afterward, but it was a different kind of rush. One edged with disbelief. Evan's parents hosted an engagement party that spring. Marina attended, dressed appropriately, blending into the crowd like any other guest. She spoke politely, laughed at the right moments, and didn't demand attention. Watching her behave normally for hours felt surreal. It made me realize how much effort, cruelty had taken from her all those years. That night, a younger cousin pulled me aside in tears and told me seeing me stand up to Marina had changed her life. She'd started therapy and was setting boundaries with her own controlling mother. Hearing that made everything feel less senseless. My pain hadn't been wasted. As wedding dress shopping approached, Marina surprised me by asking if she could come. Her voice was careful, almost tentative. I agreed under clear conditions. At the bridal shop, she sat quietly, offering no criticism. When I stepped out in the dress that felt right, I saw tears in her eyes. Later, alone, she told me I looked beautiful and said she was proud of the woman I'd become. The words were simple, but they landed hard. For a brief window, I experienced something close to the grandmother I'd always wanted. The change wasn't perfect. At a summer cookout, she reached toward my hair and stopped herself mid-motion, apologizing before walking away to calm down. Raymond gently reminded her of the boundaries, and she complied, albeit stiffly. Over time, those moments became less frequent. Some relatives still kept their distance, unwilling to risk reopening old wounds. And Marina had to accept that not everything could be repaired. My wedding day arrived under clear skies. Marina sat quietly among the guests, dressed tastefully, behaving appropriately. She cried during the vows, dabbed her eyes, and didn't make the day about herself. During the reception, she congratulated me once and returned to her seat. The absence of tension was almost overwhelming. As Evan and I danced, surrounded by people laughing freely, I realized this was what family was supposed to feel like. Months later, hosting Thanksgiving in our new home, Marina arrived with a pie and followed every boundary without complaint. She wasn't warm or affectionate, but she was respectful, and that was enough. Therapy had taught me that reconciliation didn't have to mean closeness. Sometimes, peace was the best outcome available. Standing in my kitchen that night, washing dishes beside Evan, I felt steady. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer controlled me. Marina might never fully understand the damage she caused, but I understood myself now. My hair, my body, my life belonged to me, and that knowledge felt like freedom. The months after our first quiet Thanksgiving settled into a rhythm I'd never known before. Life wasn't perfect or magically healed, but it was no longer dominated by bracing myself for Marina's next move. The absence of constant tension created space to notice other things, like how calm mornings felt when I wasn't replaying old memories, or how icily I laughed now without immediately feeling guilty for it. Evan noticed it too. He said my shoulders didn't sit so high anymore, that I moved through the world like I wasn't expecting to be grabbed from behind. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding myself together until I didn't have to anymore. Marina's therapy continued. According to Raymond, though no one pretended it had transformed her overnight, she still framed herself as misunderstood more often than not. Still slipped into passive comments when she felt ignored, but the explosive behavior had slowed. The difference was that no one rushed to manage her emotions anymore. When she sulked, people let her. When she complained, someone calmly reminded her of the boundaries and changed the subject. That shift was subtle but powerful. For decades, the family had bent around her. Now, she was being asked to adjust instead, and even when she resented it, the rules didn't change. Planning the wedding gave me a strange kind of confidence. Each decision felt like proof that my life was moving forward on my terms. Evan and I talked openly about everything, even the uncomfortable possibilities. We agreed on contingency plans, exit strategies, and signals in case Marina crossed a line. Knowing those plans existed made it easier to relax. Lena helped with seating charts and decorations, and more than once she apologized again for the past. I told her she didn't need to keep saying it, that what mattered was who she was now. Watching her stand firm with Marina, especially when it clearly frightened her, had rewritten something deep between us. There were moments when grief surprised me. Sometimes I'd see other women joking easily with their grandmothers in public, sharing affectionate touches that didn't hurt, and a familiar ache would rise in my chest. Therapy helped me sit with that feeling without letting it define me. Dr. Harris reminded me that longing didn't mean I'd made the wrong choices, only that I was human. I could mourn what I never had while still protecting myself from what had hurt me. Holding both truths at once stopped feeling like a contradiction and started feeling like maturity. As the wedding approached, Marina sent a short note asking if there was anything she could help with. The message was polite, almost formal, and I took my time before responding. Eventually, I thanked her and told her everything was handled. She replied with a simple okay. That exchange alone felt monumental. No guilt, no pressure, no dramatics, just acceptance. Evan joked that it was the most peaceful text conversation he'd ever seen involving my family, and we both laughed, a little incredulous that this was real. The wedding itself unfolded without incident, almost gently. I noticed Marina watching more than speaking, as if she were consciously choosing restraint. When she congratulated Evan, she did so sincerely, without the subtle barbs she used to lace into compliments. Lena cried through half the ceremony, and Raymond hugged me so tightly afterward, I could barely breathe. Brielle and Naomi danced like teenagers at the reception, free and loud and unafraid. At one point, I caught Marina looking around the room, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I wondered what it was like for her to sit inside consequences she could no longer deny. Marriage didn't change everything overnight, but it deepened my sense of stability. Evan and I built routines, hosted friends, planned small trips. When family gatherings came up, I felt choice instead of obligation. Sometimes I went, sometimes I didn't. Either way, there was no punishment waiting on the other side. Marina followed the rules more often than not, and when she didn't, the response was swift and calm. No arguments, no pleading, just consequences. It turned out consistency was far more powerful than confrontation. One afternoon, nearly a year after the garden party, Lena and I sat on her porch drinking coffee. She told me she'd been thinking a lot about her own childhood and how long she'd mistaken endurance for love. She said, watching me refuse to accept pain had forced her to question everything she'd normalized. Her voice shook as she admitted she was still untangling that realization. I reached for her hand and told her we were allowed to learn late, that it still counted. She squeezed my fingers like she was holding onto something solid. The final shift came quietly. At a small family dinner, Marina asked before sitting beside me, leaving a careful space between our chairs. We ate, talked about neutral things, and when it was time to leave, she said goodbye without touching me. As she walked away, I realized my body hadn't tensed once. No instinctive flinch, no silent countdown. Just calm. The absence of fear felt almost surreal, like stepping into sunlight after years underground. Later that night, standing in front of the mirror brushing my hair, I caught my reflection and paused. The curls fell freely, shaped by my own choices now, untouched by anyone else's hands. My hair no longer carried memories of pain. It was just hair. Mine. I smiled at myself, not because everything had been fixed, but because I'd finally learned that protecting myself didn't make me cruel or ungrateful. It made me whole, and that, more than anything, felt like the ending I deserved.